Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar from the Institute of Export and International Trade, looking at healthcare and assistive technology trade both today and post-transition. My name is William Barnes-Graham, and I'm a senior content editor at the Institute. I will be your host for this afternoon, and we're looking forward to lots of interaction from you, our audience, over the next hour or so. Now, this is a webinar that really does have a few contexts to it. Throughout the coronavirus pandemic, there's of course been a huge spike in global demand for healthcare, assistive technology, and PPE, and this has not been without its logistical challenges, to say the least. And looking ahead to the end of the transition period, we see a new set of challenges and also opportunities for exporters and importers in this sector. Throughout all of this, proper planning and ensuring compliance with changing regulations and obligations is a must for effective and timely trade. It's for this reason that we're delighted to be partnering with the British Healthcare Trades Association on today's webinar. And I'd like to quickly welcome Jane Weller, their Membership Engagement Manager. Hi Jane, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. And thank you for both of you for attending and accepting the BHTA today for this webinar.
Many thanks, Jane, and great to have you with us here today. And I'd also like to welcome our presenter for today, Kevin Shakespeare, the Director of Stakeholder Engagement at the Institute. Hi, Kevin. How are you? How are you today?
Hi, Will. Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be presenting today.
Kevin has been leading the Institute's training and analysis around the UK's future trading relationship with the EU and is a regular speaker on our webinar programmes. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get going. First, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window to the right-hand side of your screen. And we really do encourage you to ask questions at any point. It's a great chance to get answers to some potentially quite technical questions, but maybe not too technical. And afterwards, you will receive access to today's slide pack and a recording of today's webinar, which we'll be sending over the next day or so. To begin with, we'll be running a few polls throughout the webinar today, starting with on the next slide. So we'll be asking this poll first. So do the products you import and export have any tariffs applied? Now the options here are yes for all markets and products, yes but not for all markets and products, no for any of my products, or I think it's supposed to be markets. And then finally, I'm not sure there are tariffs for my products. Kevin, while people are answering that poll, I'd like to ask you a quick question to just set the scene a little bit. This is a sector that has been very much in the news recently, but from an international trade perspective, how well do you think the sector has adapted and coped with the significant challenges the pandemic has posed?
Yeah, thank you, Will, and again, good afternoon, everybody. It's quite interesting because I think we should never underestimate how much hard work that UK businesses have put in, whether that's in the import side, trying to get goods into the United Kingdom, whether that's for sale to charities, care homes, the National Health Service, and also on the export side. So we should never underestimate how much effort that people are in, and I'm always very, very impressed with that. One thing clearly that COVID-19 has taught everyone is to look at supply chains, to look at product conformity, licensing requirements, and to look at procedures as well. So there are always things that businesses can look at and try and prepare for the future. But also, again, hopefully those businesses that have prepared have put themselves in as good a position as possible to increase the way they trade, whether that's import trade or export trade. Thank you.
No, thank you, Kevin. A very good answer as ever. And just to share the results to that poll, so 51% said yes, but not for all markets and products. That was followed by no for any of my products or markets at 24%. Yes for all products or markets was 4%, 20% not sure at the moment. And any thoughts on that, Kevin?
Again, thank you very much for everybody completing that. Interesting there that the highest is 51% not for all market and products, and that excuse me, potentially is reflective of the type of product, but also the type of market you sell into. We are going to allude to that later on when we look at opportunities for exporting, in that some markets are more potentially closed in terms of how they operate, have tariffs on certain products. But again, quite interesting there, and it sort of will help shape some of what I'm going to say around potential tariff impacts from 2021.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Kevin. And on that note, I suppose over to you for the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. So just a very quick point. We're very pleased today to obviously work with Jane and the British Healthcare Trades Association. It's a real pleasure. We also recognise very much the importance of this sector and your contribution as well. So about the Institute of Export. The Institute have been around since 1935, and it is the Institute of Export and International Trade. So it looks at all elements of exporting, importing, supply chain, logistics. And we at the Institute covers areas such as membership training. We have professional qualifications in all elements of whether that's international trade, exporting, importing, customs procedures. We also have access to grant schemes. I'm going to refer it towards the end about that, the £50 million HMRC grant scheme. We have access to some apprenticeship programs around international trade. So a lot of different elements in terms of what we provide, as well as planning. So we provide information on post-transition planning. And one of the features we have seen, I guess, in the UK is as the UK tries to reinvent itself and has different, will have new procedures from 2021, is the importance of really professionalising and understanding it in this sector, whether that's to be compliant, whether to make sure your goods arrive on time, but also to try and gain competitive advantage. And so really the opportunity to learn more, training qualifications, especially as the grant scheme is available. And I say I'll talk more about that. Should we have the next slide, please? So in the context of today, what we're going to look at is we'll take a little look at commodity codes, classification codes first of all. We will refer to the COVID-19 commodity code list. We'll look at some of the regulatory requirements, but probably not focus on that too much today, because we're going to focus a lot on what trading is going to look like post-transition period, and that's going to be with the European Union, and also including Republic of Ireland in that, with the rest of the world, and with Northern Ireland, as there will be some impacts in terms of GB to Northern Ireland trade as well. We'll look at some elements around freight movements, but in particular best practice in customs and trade procedures, especially as for some companies or those companies that have not traded with the rest of the world. A lot of these procedures are going to potentially be new for companies, and we're going to look at some of the implications and how best to prepare. We'll look at some elements around import tariffs, where they apply, and VAT where it applies. And then look at an area around Incoterms, international commercial terms, which are essential in the context of who is responsible for what part of the trade journey. But again, it moves a lot further than that in terms of regulatory compliance and licensing. So we move to the next slide, please. So commodity codes. So commodity codes are absolutely essential, and at a world level they're known as HS codes, harmonized system codes. They're also referred to as classification and tariff codes, and to many extent they're the same thing, but they're set at the world level first of all as HS harmonized system codes. So we move to the next slide, please. So clearly classification, commodity, tariff codes are essential. Everything related to a transaction when it moves across borders really derives from the commodity code itself. And it's essential that the correct code is used, both to make sure that the goods are classified correctly, but also to make sure that where applicable, import duties and VAT applies, licensing requirements apply. So I'm very conscious we sort of looked at some commodity codes here for this sector, and we've got some examples towards the bottom of this slide, that there are some in the other category. So in this case, 90129, 90139, or the first 6 digits. It is interesting that if you or anyone is using a commodity code in the other category, that does give customs and VAT inspectors, they do tend to start looking at that, because it could mean that possibly something is not classified correctly. Having said that, in this sector, there are probably disproportionately a number of products in the other category, but we would obviously stress that it's very important that correct commodity code is used. Like everything on a customs declaration, it is your responsibility as the trader to have the correct code. It's not just the responsibility of the freight forwarder, customs intermediary, if they're making the customs declaration on your behalf. It's your responsibility, and that doesn't matter whether it's a high value import or export, a medium value import or export, or even a small parcel that's carried by a small parcel carrier. It's still the trader's responsibility. So looking at or doing a review of potential commodity codes, I first of all looked at a world level, at the World Trade Organization, which is the first 6-digit codes that apply. And generally for assistive technology, the tariffs are generally 0, not in every case, but generally 0. And it is fair to say that's reinforced by the World Health Organization's initiative to very much improve access to devices and technology in this sector. And clearly, I think the WHO is very keen on getting more conformity, standardization in this sector to really get more access to these products, especially in developing nations. And that links in well with some of the UK's requirements and trying to export more to developing nations. So we use Africa, for example, the likes of Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda. So really trying to link in there and trying to make access for UK products, or Malaysia, Jordan. So lots of different countries where the UK government is very keen to support these countries and support trade with these current countries. So access to products, certainly in the assistive technology sector, really does work in very well with some of the UK government's agenda. There is a COVID-19 commodity code list, and I'll refer to that on the next slide. If we look more widely at healthcare and medical devices, generally 0 in developed countries, but there are some tariffs in developing countries. So clearly tariff barriers, as we call them, if you're paying 2, 3, 5, 8% tariffs, all can have an impact on the cost of a product, and therefore they impact export sales. But in a lot of developed markets, in healthcare and medical devices, the tariff tends to be 0, but there are some tariffs in developing countries. But I'll speak more about tariffs shortly. If we have the next slide, please. So if we consider now the COVID-19 commodity code list, so the World Customs Organization started off this list, and it really was a guidance to countries around the world as to the type of products that they could create a commodity code list around. And we can see on the right-hand side of the slide the types of products that were on that commodity code list. And you have these slides will be made available to you. You'll have these links available to check every product and commodity within that. The EU added products to that, and you have the EU list there. So it added things like monitors, humidifiers to that. And the UK has gone further and added further to the EU list in terms of the UK commodity code list. And again, you've got the link there. And probably this list is very important because it allows generally goods to be imported free of import duty and free of import VAT. But in some cases, the actual procedures for importing and documentation requirements can also be simplified as well, because it's very much in the national need at the moment. Obviously, goods brought in have to be compliant. They must meet certain regulatory requirements, for example, CE marking. But this commodity code list, it's been indicated in the UK's recent border operating model, will continue into 2021. So have a look if your product is in there, and potentially if it creates that that simplified process, that impact for you, then obviously that could be a benefit for your business, but ultimately benefit for the United Kingdom as a whole. If we have a next slide, please. So looking at regulatory requirements, we have done separate webinars on PPE and medical devices, and it's something like other organisations, we've had high numbers of questions on. And we're trying to draw a distinction here between PPE on the middle table, the left-hand side of the table, where it's intended exclusively for protection of the user or the person wearing it, as distinguished as to whether it's considered a medical device. That is clearly very, very key in terms of protecting patients. Certainly for PPE, some countries, and China would be probably one of the primary examples, sometimes require the importer to sign or produce a joint declaration with the exporter, which covers the compliance aspects of the product. And that really comes down to the fact that Chinese customs, Chinese authorities don't want to be solely responsible for a faulty product, or if a product doesn't work in another country. So sometimes there is that joint declaration required with the importer, where the importer is saying that they recognise the compliance requirements here, they recognise the need to meet compliance, and the importer will have to take some responsibility for that. You'll see on this slide we have CE marking, which I've referred to, and that's been a key element in the context of PPE and the requirement to meet the EU requirements for the CE marking. Clearly, post-transition period, there is talk of a UK CA marking, which will apply. Medical devices regulation is clearly very key, and if products have chemical elements, the requirement to meet REACH legislation as well. So both CE marking and REACH and MDR clearly become very important in the post-transition environment. And as a third country outside the European Union, the UK companies trying to access things like CE marking and notified bodies becomes more of an issue, in that notifying body has to be based in the European Union, which clearly the UK will no longer be in. And in terms of REACH for chemicals, the only representative would need to be based in the European Union. So again, you couldn't have our only representative from the UK. Similar for CE marking, you couldn't have a UK notifying body, or you can't self-certify from a UK legal entity there. So those are compliance aspects which need to be considered. It is possible within trade deals, and I think REACH has been talked about in this respect, that there could be some element of mutual recognition. However, there's a lot to be agreed in a UK-EU trade deal. Clearly, tariffs probably being one of the most important there, before we even get round to talk about mutual recognition on certain products and devices. So we can have a next slide, please. So these are just some examples for you in terms of distinguishing the different requirements between medical devices and PPE. And again, this is very, very important in the context of how the imported good is treated. And it's linked again to the commodity code. So the commodity codes, as I say, become so important, not just for tariffs, if there are any, not just for VAT, but actual compliance requirements as well. If we have a next slide, please. So let's consider now trade in 2021. We're going to move forward to what the real impacts are now for businesses. So certainly we saw in March, April at the Institute, the key focus was on the impacts of COVID-19, how that affected businesses, how that affected supply chains. A lot of the recent announcements from the government have been around post-transition period trading. And it's clear the government is very much looking towards, from the 1st of January next year, the transition period ends and we move into the new environment, which I will speak about. So we'll talk about that very shortly. And I think we've got another poll question coming up now. Thank you.
Yes, we do. Move to the next slide and I'll launch the poll now, which is basically asking about people's preparedness for changes to trade with the EU at the end of the transition period. So the options range from very prepared, quite prepared, not very prepared, not at all prepared, or not sure. And just while people are answering that, this might be something you cover shortly, Kevin, but we've had a couple of people ask questions already, which is great. Please do continue to ask questions. But one from Mark was, are we going to have a review of the current guidance post-Brexit and the medical device regulation introduction? And we also had a question in advance, which is asking something similar, which is the UK going to adopt the medical devices regulation into UK requirements, processes and procedures post 1st of January?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And again, whilst we're not necessarily covering MDR in this webinar, my understanding is that medical devices regulation has been, by the EU, been effectively put back a year because of the impacts of COVID-19. Like a lot of the mutual recognition or the standards that the UK is looking to cover, it is fair to say, like a lot of this, even like the border operating model we're going to look at, it still has to be written and taken into UK law. So there isn't a huge amount of legislation that's still required in this space. The Institute, like other organisations, are very much trying to get the government to really push for mutual recognition in as many areas as possible, as the UK and the European Union have been in this together to some extent. The European Union equally are concerned that the UK may diverge from their standards, which is one of the blockages to the actual trade deal. So medical devices will be a key area of discussion in that respect.
Thank you, Kevin. And just to share the responses to that poll, so unfortunately no one's very prepared, but 42% are quite prepared, which is broadly encouraging. 36% not very prepared, and fortunately only 8% are not still prepared, for remainder being not sure. How does that compare to the other times you've asked this poll for other sectors, Kevin?
Yeah, it's always interesting, and to be honest, I wasn't sure quite what to expect here, because it is fair to say certain sectors like food, agriculture, manufacturing, automotive have received a lot of visibility in the context of the Brexit post-transition period impacts. So wasn't sure what to expect here. It is obviously pleasing that 42% are quite prepared. Equally, there is, if you're not very prepared, there still is time to prepare, and hopefully today will assist in that respect in looking at the actions. But yeah, the point is there still is time to prepare. There is the grant scheme that I will talk about in terms of trying to prepare, but it's never too late. But equally, companies are taking supply chain decisions. It might be September. I know in some sectors that they're going to need to be a lot of ordering in September. So it's not too late, but companies do really need to start now, and hopefully today will assist in that process. But equally, there might be some areas today, areas of opportunity or impacts, for example, with regard to Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, that will also have to be considered. So thanks again, everyone, for advising there. And 42% quite prepared is still good. Thank you. So first of all, we're going to look at exports to the European Union, including to the Republic of Ireland. And it's easy for me to say, well, they become like exports to the rest of the world. That is true, but let's look specifically at what we mean by that. So if we have the next slide, please. So we're going to look at a trade journey, a fictitious journey from Royston, as one I quite often use, to Essen in Germany. This could be to other locations. It could be to Dublin, it could be to Cork, it could be to Madrid, it could be to Paris, or various other locations. The principle is the goods are leaving the shores of Great Britain in this instance, and they are moving to mainland Europe, or the territory of the European Union. So in this instance, we have the goods available at the exporter's premises, and the goods are loaded onto the lorry. So why have I shown that lorry element different? That's important when I'm going to talk about Incoterms, international commercial terms. That loading process is very important in here, and I'll talk more about that later. In this instance, the lorry moves from the exporter's premises in Royston to the port of dispatch. In this case, we're going to use Felixstowe, which is also the UK's largest container port, but also very heavily used on the Felixstowe to Rotterdam sailings to the largest container port in mainland Europe. Now, currently, the goods move seamlessly, but from the end of a transition period, from the 1st of January next year, a customs declaration will be required, an outbound customs declaration, in the same way as the goods were moving from Felixstowe to Dubai, for example. Exactly the same principle there. So somebody has to let the customs authorities know in advance that the goods are leaving the country, and that customs declaration requires a number of fields to be completed. We'll talk about who is going to complete those fields and the liability shortly. So let's say the goods clear customs in this instance, they're loaded on board the vessel, and the vessel sails from Felixstowe to Rotterdam. But the goods have to clear customs at Rotterdam, not at the moment, but from the end of a transition period they will. And an inbound customs declaration is required to alert the customs authorities at Rotterdam that goods are on their way. And again, the fields have to be completed correctly in the correct format. But let's say, so we got two declarations. We got one for leaving the territory of the United Kingdom and one for goods of entering the territory of the European Union in our example here. And again, it could be the same if the goods are moving from, say, Liverpool to Dublin. And in this instance, a good move from Rotterdam, and they move across to Essen in Germany by road and lorry in this case. So yeah, we can see there we've got the two customs declarations. But as we're going to look at on the next slide, there's a lot more to consider than just the customs declarations, because we're leaving the customs union as well as the single market, and we're a third country. There's a number of other considerations. So if we can have the next slide, please. So in the context of those declarations, this is from the exporter's perspective in Royston. And also, again, if it's going to Dublin, Republic of Ireland, exactly the same. So an export customs declaration is required. Who's responsible for that? Well, somebody is, and we'll talk about who is responsible shortly. There could be requirements around the CE marking and REACH for chemicals in terms of conformity. If the goods have a dual use, a civilian and a military purpose, then what become exports to European Union will require an export license. Temporary exports will require an ATA carnet, which currently you require for the rest of the world, but not for the European Union, but you will need that. You will also need a safety and security declaration, so an outbound safety exit declaration for goods leaving the UK. And your wooden packaging must be ISPM 15 compliant. So if wooden packaging, you have your own wooden packaging in your business, it should have the kite mark, an ISPM 15 kite mark, which is a United Nations standard, which indicates that the wooden packaging and wooden pallets must be specially heat treated to avoid the spread of beetles and other pests. And that will now be a requirement, as with all these, for moving goods to the European Union. So suddenly it's not just about the customs declaration, it's all these other things, and obviously it could be other requirements as well. So we've looked at the export side, but it's not just an impact for the exporter, there could also be an impact for the importer, your buyer in the European Union, in the Republic of Ireland, in France, Germany, Poland, whichever country. If we have a next slide, please. So let's look at imports to the EU. What's required there? Well, there could be possible import tariffs. We have said a lot could be zero tariffs. If there is no trade deal and there are tariffs, then somebody's going to have to pay their import tariff. somebody has to make that import customs declaration. The importer should also make sure their CE marking and various regulations have been met. Possibly packaging and labelling needs to meet the requirements of the EU country, and possibly if VAT is payable, then import VAT is payable upon importation, unless the importer can defer that VAT in some way, for example, for a VAT deferment account to their customs authority. So suddenly we can see there's impacts here for the importer. And so we can see lots of impacts here, but who is going to have these impacts? Is it going to be our UK exporter in Royston? Is it going to be the German importer in Essen? Where does the freight forwarder come in? The freight forwarder clearly can provide services in addition to carrying the goods and arranging transport, or arranging hauliers and vessel operators, for example. But a lot of the ultimate liability is with the trader. So again, that's the EU side. Now let's look at it the other way, coming in from the EU to the UK, especially Great Britain. So if we have a next slide, please, next couple of slides, please. So again, imports from the EU, including the Republic of Ireland, now become like imports from the rest of the world. Maybe simplifying it a bit in that statement, but that is the general principle. So if we have a next slide, please. So the reverse here, the goods are moving from Essen, Germany to Royston. We have a couple of pictures in this respect as well. Same principle again, the goods are leaving the shores of the European Union, in this case leaving at Rotterdam. Somebody needs an outbound declaration. Goods are entering the shores, the territory of Great Britain, and somebody has to provide an import declaration at Felixstowe. We've got all the same processes, the loading, the unloading, but we've got at the heart of it these two customs declarations required. So if we have a next slide, please. So there is a temptation when we look at the next slide to say, well, let's just reverse it for exports to imports. And to some element that's true, but there's a few other things we're going to consider here. So yes, we've got the export declaration for goods leaving the European Union. We've got carnets, wooden packaging, the exit declaration for safety and security. And just to be clear on safety and security, because this is a really important point, and we get a lot of questions on this. Is safety and security declaration different from a customs declaration? The answer is yes. So prior to the UK joining the European community, safety and security declarations had to be made, an exit declaration at the UK border and an entry declaration when the goods entered the European Union, or vice versa. So that doesn't change at all. We're now becoming, as we did in some respects prior to trading with the joining the European community. The difference is the volumes are more substantial and supply chains are more entwined than they were all those years ago. So clearly there's greater volume, greater supply chain connectivity than there was. So a lot to consider again for businesses, whether that is the exporter or the importer. And the best way is for the importer and exporter, the buyer and the seller, to work together. Communicate, very, very important. If we have the next slide, please. So we can see in terms of imports into the UK, again, if there's no trade deal between the UK and the EU and your product is not a zero tariff product, tariffs could apply. Declarations, customs declarations, safety and security declarations continue to apply. Import VAT will be payable if the product is VATable, I must stress. And the UK has announced postponed VAT accounting, which did exist, I think, prior to 1993, where you don't have to pay import VAT upon goods being imported. You can apply the principle of postponed VAT accounting and set it off in your VAT return. And that, I would stress, applies to imports from the whole world now, not just the EU, from the 1st of January next year. So that obviously could be a benefit. What we're not sure at the moment is how long that postponed VAT accounting will be in place. Will it be forever? Will it be for 12 months? Will it be for 3 or 5 years? But it has been announced the UK is applying the principle of postponed VAT accounting from the 1st of January next year. So that should be a benefit for the businesses where VAT applies. So if we have a next slide, please. So this, in theory, starts to be where things start to look slightly different between the UK and the European Union. The UK has announced its border operating model, and we've had a number of webinars at the Institute on that over the last couple of weeks because of the significance of it. Does this affect your sector? Well, I think it depends partly whether there are going to be tariffs, whether there's a trade deal, or whether you have zero tariffs. The UK has announced for standard goods, so we'll talk about what non-standard goods are, controlled goods shortly. For standard goods, it's possible to defer making the customs declaration for 6 months until the 1st of July. What you would have to do, though, is you would have to go through a process which is referred to as EIDR, an entry into declarant's records. And you would have to record all the details and make the full declaration 6 months later. So if you were bringing in goods, for example, on the 1st of April, you'd have to make the full declaration by the 1st of October. Your agent, your forwarder can do that on your behalf, but they'll clearly quite understandably charge you for that service. But when you come to make the full declaration, you will have to apply for a customs authorization. And again, sorry to use all these technical terms if you're not familiar with them. One is CFSP, Customs Freight Simplified Procedures, that allows you to defer the declaration. You don't have to have CFSP by the 1st of January, but you need to have applied and been authorized before, in using our example, if it's the 1st of April, before the 1st of October. So, excuse me, that becomes important. And if anyone's got any questions on CFSP or the process, very happy to take them. Controlled goods, so beverages, excise, military goods, have full declarations, live animals, plants, full declarations have to be made on the 1st of January. And pre-notifications and certifications required, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. Similarly, stage 2, products of animal origin, inspections are required as well. But again, we're not here to talk about that today. So for standard goods, full import controls only really start to apply from the 1st of July next year. And that's full customs declarations, any tariffs must be paid. And so the main reason you would defer tariffs and use this deferral process is that you don't have to pay the tariff until 6 months later, until you make the full declaration. Full safety and security checks, any inspections, sanitary, phytosanitary, all start to apply from the 1st of July. And again, happy to take further questions on that and the benefits of deferring if there are tariffs. And I know I'm talking about if, because clearly UK-EU trade deal discussions are absolutely fundamental to this. So that's from the European Union to Great Britain, not to Northern Ireland. I'll speak about Northern Ireland shortly. So if we have a next slide, please. So we're now going to look, as it links in very nicely, to GB-NI trade. So if we can have a next slide, please. Now, Northern Ireland is clearly in an interesting position because Northern Ireland is both in the customs territory of the UK and the customs territory of the European Union. So whilst if there are any businesses here based in Northern Ireland, it is in a different position from Great Britain, in that goods moving from Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland are not subject to any customs declarations, not subject to any tariffs, but equally Northern Ireland businesses have to meet the product and compliance requirements of the European Union. Goods moving from Northern Ireland to Rotterdam, if they move, for example, from Belfast to Rotterdam, it's exactly the same. Northern Ireland is part, and the island of Ireland is part of the customs territory of the European Union. But what does that mean then when goods move from GB to Northern Ireland? So it has been announced that customs declarations will be required because goods are moving to the territory, the customs territory of the European Union. So customs declarations will be required. Who's going to make those declarations? Well, depends on the Incoterms. I'm going to talk more about that very shortly. But customs declarations, whether they're full declarations, simplified declarations, still to be determined, have to be made. So this suddenly has an impact on GB to NI trade. Safety and security declarations will also be required because goods are moving to the customs territory of the European Union. At-risk goods, so goods that are deemed to be at risk of moving from Northern Ireland to Republic of Ireland, tariffs will apply. In some cases, initially, they will be rebated if they stay in Northern Ireland, but evidence may have to be provided to that effect. I'm stressing if there are tariffs here. The main examples used are agricultural goods, but it could impact in goods moving into a manufacturing process in Northern Ireland could be at risk of moving to the Republic of Ireland. And goods checks, sanitary, phytosanitary. So again, happy to take further questions on Northern Ireland. We have provided webinars and masterclasses on that topic, but happy to take further questions. Excuse me. If we have the next slide, please. So I just wanted to cover post and parcels. Sometimes we get questions on this. We'll talk about goods under £135 in a minute. There are special arrangements in terms of the Royal Mail, but those of you familiar with using the CN22, CN23 for rest of world trade, that will now apply for EU trade. Some special parcel operators will have special arrangements with customs to bulk the declaration. You still, however, have to provide evidence to that declaration, the import or the export declaration to customs, irrespective of whether it's bulked. And again, I'll refer to that when I refer to proof of export. So general principle is EU trade becomes the same as rest of world trade. If we have the next slide, please. So now we're going to look at goods not exceeding £135. Now, again, if this doesn't apply to any of you, we don't need to focus too much. But it wasn't a major announcement last week, which probably was missed, but wasn't really focused on. So import VAT is no longer due at the border. The responsibility for VAT is the responsibility of the overseas supplier, and they are responsible for registering for VAT in the UK and accounting for VAT. The low value consignment relief of £15 is being withdrawn. So a number of VAT implications there for low value goods that businesses must consider. And in a lot of cases, it's putting the onus on the overseas supplier. Whether they're registered for VAT or not registered for VAT at the moment is putting the onus on them. Again, happy to discuss that further or have further conversations if that applies and impacts your business. In theory, it puts the onus on the overseas supplier and not you. If we have the next slide, please. So we're moving forward nicely, but let's now look at the implication of Incoterms and liability for customs declarations. I've alluded to this a lot, so if we have a next slide, we'll really get into some of the key aspects of this. Incoterms determine who is responsible for the customs declaration, who is responsible for licenses, who is the declarant of record. And in the customs declaration, you have to select the correct commodity code. It's one of the very first things I started. You must have correct information. You as a trader are liable, even if the forwarder or the agent is making the declaration on your behalf. Customs will look to you, and you must have a complete full proof of export file. Again, happy to provide further information on proof of export, proof of import. That requires the customs declaration, the goods departed message, the transport document, the commercial invoice, the packing list, so on and so forth. There has to be evidence that the goods have left the shores or entered the shores of the United Kingdom. So the commodity code is key, and the Incoterm. So if you're selling on ex works terms, all the responsibility is down to the overseas buyer. That's a lot of responsibility to take on. Are they happy to do that? Are they aware they've got all, if they're in Europe, they've got all this extra work next year from 1st of January. If you're selling on DDP, delivered duty paid, irrespective of what the freight forwarder is doing for you, you are responsible not just to UK customs, but to customs in France, Spain, whichever or Republic of Ireland, whichever country. You would need to register for VAT and obtain an EU EORI number, which will be different from what will become only a UK EORI number next year. Happy to take further questions on that and clarify further, which is why the government has put this huge amount of money into the grant scheme, so businesses and traders can understand, as well as forwarders and intermediaries, the implications here of what this is going to mean. And I'm really going over it very quickly today because obviously there is further information and training and qualifications that businesses can take. The UK wants to be the best in class for customs and trade procedures and free trade going forward, which is partly why this grant scheme money has been made available. So if we have a next slide, please. So next slide is really just a summary, but it shows when we talk about declarant of record, what that responsibility is, whether you're the exporter of record or the importer of record, or you're splitting the responsibility. But we can see there the accuracy of the information, the licenses, the authenticity of documents. Yes, the freight forwarder, the agent, can make them on your behalf, but irrespective whether it's going by sea, road, channel, tunnel, or by air, it is your responsibility as a trader. And if we have the next slide, please. So as we now move towards towards the final slide, you have a couple of choices on customs declarations. You can use an intermediary, which is can be the freight forwarder in some cases, could use an agent or a broker who's not necessarily carrying the goods, or you can do it yourself, make your own declaration. And generally, we're finding in our polls and our various webinars that it's about half and half in terms of how businesses are approaching this. It does depend on the nature of your business, whether you have qualified staff and whether you can train people, which again is why the grant scheme is available. So you can see there, reliability, correct commodity code. But one of the benefits potentially of this, if you're just trading with the EU, is it could give you opportunities to upskill, to trade with the rest of the world, which the UK is very, very keen to do in this post-transition period environment. So if we have the next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend too long on this, but some companies might look to use customs special procedures such as warehousing, inward processing where there's a manufacturing process, which if there are import duties and import that, if you may be on re-export, you would be able to eliminate payments. That also applies for return goods and repairs as well. And again, happy to take questions on that and discuss concepts on that. Normally, to use customs procedures, including deferment of duty, you require a bank guarantee. The border operating model has indicated that guarantee may only be needed for higher risk businesses, so those with a history of non-compliance or financial difficulties. If you've been compliant, you've got good record keeping, you may potentially no longer need a guarantee, and that's been a big barrier to businesses using these services. I would stress we're not sure if this is going to apply for the whole of the world or just the EU, and how long this waiver from guarantee. You can speak with your freight forwarder around transit procedures, or if you're big enough, you could possibly look at transit procedures yourself. Whereas the declaration takes place at the end destination and goods move from what's called an authorised consignor to an authorised consignee. That could be very important if goods are transiting from the EU through the land bridge of Great Britain to the Republic of Ireland. Also very important if you're moving goods from GB to France and moving on to the rest of the EU, like Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, for example. Could be, and possibly Switzerland as well. So it could become very, very important in that respect. If we have a next slide, please. So I'm very conscious we want to get some questions in. There's some more details on customs special procedures there, which we're obviously happy to speak further about. And if you want more information on possible use of these procedures, we're happy to discuss that. If we have a next slide, please. So with regard to rest of world trade, next slide, please, thanks. The UK is trying to renegotiate. The EU has 74 trade agreements with third countries, and the UK is trying to renegotiate them. So if we look at an example here, these are the countries you've got the web link where the UK has renegotiated. I just wanted to mention Switzerland here because I know some of you might trade with Switzerland. is that a trade deal has been renegotiated with Switzerland, but we do suggest you look at the terms of that trade deal. So if you go on this website and click on Switzerland, you'll find further information about the trade deal. I am aware in medical devices and life sciences that there have been some changes from the EU trade deal. So do look at that. Make sure your product is captured within, because products in a trade deal are covered at a commodity code tariff line. There. So I just wanted to mention that. Obviously, there's other countries here, Norway, for example. It's not just Switzerland, South Korea, Morocco, for example. If we have a next slide, please. So next slide looks at where trade deals have still got to be agreed. So Canada is an example where it's still got to be agreed. Japan is a big trade deal, Turkey, the EU themselves, and the UK is also looking to negotiate trade deals with the likes of the United States, Australia and New Zealand, which would simplify the way we do business with those countries. Customs declaration still required, but tariffs, but also product conformity, licensing would also be simplified. The UK's target within 3 years to have 80% of world trade from the UK tariff-free and subject to trade deals. So clearly the US have to be part of that, possibly India, certainly lots of parts of Africa have to be part of that as well, and clearly the EU. So a lot of work taking place on that, and also there's a small business initiative within the trade deal as well to specifically help small businesses. If we have a next slide, please. So rules of origin, I'm just going to skirt over this. If anyone's got any questions on rules of origin, where you've got complex supply chains with goods moving in and out of the EU to the UK, please raise a question there, because rules of origin on trade with the rest of the world could be impacted if you've got a high level of EU content in your goods. So happy to take questions separately on that or today. If we have a next slide, please. So just wanted to mention around the Sunshine Rule and obviously requirements of UK Bribery Act. Unfortunately, some of the activities of pharmaceutical companies and healthcare professionals have had to be reviewed, not just in the United States, but globally. And there is increasing regulation around selling to healthcare professionals. Just wanted to mention that. And if we have a next slide, please. So final slide for me, next slide, is around the grant scheme. So £50 million, announcement will be made by the government tomorrow. £34 million has already been used in grant scheme for capacity building to help importers, exporters, intermediaries, freight forwarders, agents, brokers as well. Announcement is due tomorrow. The Institute has a link there to the grant scheme. £34 million has already been used. We would encourage companies to access this money whilst it's available, because we've seen a massive rush in companies in the last couple of weeks looking to use this. So watch out further, but look at our note there. Can your business benefit from this if you haven't used it already? Many businesses have, no matter what size you are, small, large, medium, please use this opportunity. So if we have a next slide, please, I think that probably concludes a lot of what I was going to say. So I'll pass back to Will. Thank you.
Many thanks, Kevin. And just as we enter for Q&A, I'll just launch a final poll asking if people have used customs authorizations or customs special procedures, such as transit or inward processing, some of the things mentioned by Kevin earlier. Now, to get into the questions straight off, so I'll do a double parter because we're short on time. Louise has asked, what's happening with transitional simplified procedures? And we had a question from Jason asking, would becoming AEO approved help the export process?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. First of all, transitional simplified procedures was announced last year, which would have applied in the event of no deal Brexit, simplifying the import process. That no longer exists, and the three-stage import process in the border import controls I referred to has replaced it. So TSP, transitional simplified, no longer apply. AEO is a really interesting one. So AEO is really sometimes referred to as trusted trader, is taking it to the next level. So it's around safety and security in supply chain. It's around trying to get the benefits of being known as trusted. It is a big process to go through. Some of you on the call may be existing AEOs or thinking about the process. We're very happy to take further questions on that. Now, clearly some big companies, the likes of retailers, the big pharmaceutical companies will be AEOs. But if you're part of a supply chain there, it is worth looking at that because it is working its way down the supply chain to the tier 1s, the tier 2s. So AEO is going to become increasingly important to how we trade. Any questions on that, we're very happy, and thank you for the initial question, but happy to take further. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And just to quickly share the results to that poll, so well over 50% are using them or considering using them. So 13 already, 44 considering, and 42% do not have a requirement for using them. To quickly get into some questions then, so we had one from Barend who asked, are companies having challenges with HMRC since they say that our medical products could be used in a non-medical environment and therefore they want to apply a fabric tariff instead of a zero medical tariff? How do we work around this situation?
That's a really, really good question. It does come back to, and I can really understand your point there. So what I would suggest in a lot of cases is to ask for a binding tariff information. But if you can come back to us, we heard an announcement, we're on all the government committees on Monday, that there is going to be a new tariff classification regime, I'll rephrase that. There's going to be a new way of applying for tariffs. It's not going to be called binding information tariff, which is the EU term. So if you can take a note to come back to us, also liaise with Jane and the Healthcare Trades Association to come back to us. There's going to be a big announcement on that in checking tariff codes. So and we at the Institute will be involved in that committee as well. We won't be the only ones, there'll be a lot of government involved in it, but we want to shape that. So what I would suggest for the person raising that question, please raise it with us as well as the Healthcare Trades Association, because we can put that, we won't mention your name, but that is a great example we'd like to put forward where a realistic approach is taken to making sure that the correct commodity code is used. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. A question from Jackie. She's asked, we send part finished products for fitting to Ireland on a regular basis. How will this work once we return to finish a product per customer's requirements? Sorry, I got a bit garbled there. Did you get that question there, Kevin?
Yeah, if I understood it correctly, you're sending goods to Ireland as part of a manufacturing process, and the process is taking place in the Republic of Ireland. You've got a couple of options there. One is, I'm not sure if it's the Irish company is part or linked to your company, or it's a separate company. They could possibly apply for inward processing, customs procedure, so upon import, but they've still got the impact of re-export. It is possible that you could apply for outward processing. So again, if you can send us further information, copy Jane and British Healthcare Trades Association as well, we can look at that and see whether outward processing could possibly apply in that instance.
Thank you, Kevin. An easier one for me to say from Jim is there any more information on the UKCA marking?
Yes, it's a good question. I was on a big thing with Tech UK last week, and the CA marking was a huge one. It was interesting. My take from that was huge announcements last October on the CA marking in the event of a no-deal Brexit, but a lot of it has gone quiet since. And I think the impression I got was it's still quiet. There is still possibly some talk of mutual recognition around the CE marking. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Although the UKCA marking could still be on the table. I think there will have to be announcements shortly. We can't keep going on whether it's REACH and the CECA marking saying, well, we're all discussing this big trade deal with the EU, this has got to come later. We all have to prepare. So ourselves, like others, are really putting the pressure on the government to try and make sure that they provide some clarity here and not just refer back to notices last October.
Thank you, Kevin. And I'll do one last question from Martin, who says, will we have to pay duty on the import of electronic dedicated communication aids from our parent company based in Belgium post-Brexit? And how much will this be? And these devices are classified as Class 1 medical.
Yeah, so the answer technically all depends. You'll have to make a customs declaration, depends on the commodity code. If you can send in the commodity code, copy British Healthcare Trades Association again, we can have a quick look up. It all depends on the commodity code as to whether. Clearly, a lot of medical devices, for example, or Class A's are 0. However, it really does depend on the commodity code. So if you're able to establish the commodity code, that becomes key. If you're not aware of the commodity code, it's a good example where this tariff notification is required.
Just the last comment from Fiona has just written in, we don't have long enough to wait for mutually recognised CE mark. We need to appoint authorised representatives now. And that's very much a common feeling amongst manufacturers, isn't it, Kevin?
Absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. We can't, and mutual recognition might not happen. And there is, you may have heard, a shortage of notified bodies in the medical devices sector as well. So there is some talk potentially, and again, the British Healthcare Trade Association might be better answer this around deferring or sort of extending the requirement for an EU assessed notifying body there. But you're absolutely correct. We can't wait till mutual recognition. This is just too important an area.
Well, I think on that note, thank you once again, Kevin. If we can move to the last slide, please. So yeah, thank you once again to Kevin for the presentation and to the British Healthcare Trades Association for partnering with us on today's webinar. I hope everyone has found that useful. Just to leave on a note about the Institute, we do deliver a comprehensive suite of training courses covering all aspects of exporting and importing, including customs declarations, as mentioned earlier, and these courses will help you to prepare for the new trade rules next year. Many of these courses, as Kevin mentioned, are fully fundable by government grants, and we really do recommend you not to miss the opportunity to get funded training as part of your preparations. Membership with the Institute also gives you a range of benefits, including access to a technical helpline, discounts on training courses, a wealth of online resources, a daily bulletin with all the key trade stories, networking opportunities, hopefully sometime soon, continuing professional development, industry recognition, and so much more. To find out more about our training and membership offerings, please visit the site at export.org.uk or feel free to get in touch at institute@export.org.uk. For now, though, thank you for tuning in to today. We hope you found the session useful. Please do take the exit survey to let us know what you thought and to suggest any future topics we could cover. But for now, goodbye everyone. Thank you.